You're listening to Knowing Faith, a podcast of the Village Church. This is Kyle Worley, and I'm joined by my co-hosts Jen Wilkin and JT English. And on today's episode, we're also joined by one of our favorite folks, Taryn Mays. We gave her that nickname in the context. Maybe we didn't give her the nickname. We thought we did, but then she said that people often use Taryn Mays. But anyways, it was a really important discussion on the story of Absalom and David and how we can see even a picture of the coming, better, perfect son of David in the story of Absalom, the flawed son of David. So we hope you enjoy the discussion. So JT, you look well refreshed, well tanned.
Oh, we just got back from one of the best vacations we've ever had in our lives. It was fantastic.
That's awesome.
It was too short. You know, sometimes vacations can be too long, and you're like, you've got a day or two left.
Never had that experience.
Yeah, you have. Like the 10 or like I went to Israel once, and like day 11 or 12, I was like, get me back, get me some Chick-fil-A. Day 12 in Israel of eating olives.
That's what you missed.
I am
That's
ready.
what you missed.
I like that his trip to the Holy Land was just a little too long, but his trip to Mexico wasn't quite long enough.
Yeah, let's talk more about that, JT.
12-day trip, 3-day trip. There's the difference. We had a great time. That's great. You know, Mason has walked through some serious health stuff over the past year. We had to cancel a lot of vacations last year. So, and what's weird is when we've traveled a lot. The Lord's been kind. We've been able to travel a bit. But when she got sick, my biggest, I wouldn't call it a regret, but one of the things I was most like aching for was just experiences, memories, going to go see the world together.
Yeah.
So we went and celebrated her good health and just, you know, all the Lord taught us this past year. It was wonderful.
My, this is a hard right turn because you're thanking the Lord for this sweet thing.
Thank you, Lord.
And I'm about to make a joke about
move away
you.
from you. Yeah.
But when you,
this is our relationship, folks.
My image of you on vacation is that right when you show up, you find the other 5 dudes who want to have a volleyball tournament. And you're like, guys, we're doing this right now.
I was just thinking of like a CrossFit workout.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Where am I going to go? Like, find someplace
He's
to
like,
work
oh
out.
man, it's incredibly beautiful. Look at
No.
these views. Hey, real quick, I got a question for you, manager. Is there a CrossFit community here?
No, that
Where's
is
your
not.
gym?
That is not what I do. I literally sleep all day.
Really?
I listen to an audiobook.
Okay.
Phil Knight, Shoe Dog.
Oh, that's such a good book.
Yeah.
Are y'all familiar with this book?
I've heard about it.
Yeah.
I know Phil Knight. That's it.
Yeah. You know him personally?
Yeah, No.
Yeah, I was about to say. Offline conversation, me and you. I want to meet Phil Knight.
Taryn is on the show.
Yes. So this voice, the other voice, the person who personally knows Phil Knight
Yeah, it's me. My claim to fame.
is Taryn Mays. Welcome, Taryn Mays. We're so glad that you're here.
Thank you so much. I
So
appreciate
glad.
it.
This is when we'll cue the applause track. So I just want to say to the booth, thank you for the applause track. Thank you.
Well, and thank you, yes, for the applause.
Yeah, for all the folks that are clapping in their hearts. Because
They hear my name.
Yeah, right. When people were driving in the car, they were like some people have pulled over to the road and they're listening to this right now because their applause is still going.
Yeah, no, I can feel that now.
No, we are really glad. Taryn is one of our Bible teachers. And working primarily out of the Plano campus.
That's right, yes. So I get to oversee our group's team and then lead and teach our women's Bible class along with a couple of our covenant members who are faithful and amazing, and it is just the gift of my life to be able to do it.
She's also my friend.
Well, that's great.
She's all of our friends.
Team.
I love that. We love friends. We love Bible teaching.
Yeah.
And so
true.
when we were like, hey, who are some folks we want to have in when we're going through 2 Samuel, it was just a no-brainer. Let's get Taryn in to talk through 2 Samuel. And today...
Because the theologians on this side of the table need some help when we get...
Yeah, if people just saw...
you guys are,
If people... I mean, I guess they know it because they're hearing the Bible ones. But when we get to 2 Samuel, like the moments right before we start are some of the most terrifying moments of my week.
What is this again?
Like, oh yeah, Absalom. His name starts with A. You know, there's a lot of names in the Bible that start with A, isn't there? That's just a quick reflection.
We need our Bible teachers in here to
fine.
keep us straight.
It's true. And so we've got Jen and Taryn in here to tell us what the Bible says. And we're going through 2 Samuel. You may maybe you remember this, but currently the village has been in kind of a 2-semester study. 1 Samuel in the fall, 2 Samuel in the spring. If you're looking for those resources, you can find curriculum and audio from those teachings on tvcresources.net. But some of the things, Jen likes to talk about like what gets left on the cutting floor. We don't really get to dig into those things. in the Bible teaching a lot. And so sometimes the podcast just become an opportunity to talk about interesting parts of the story or elements that you had to cut because you were going through 6 chapters in a week or whatever. And so today we're talking about Absalom and his daddy issues. 2 Samuel 14 through 20. And so let's just kind of kick it off with a big question. So somebody just tuned into Knowing Faith and they're like, I'll give this a try. Who is Absalom? Why does he matter in 2 Samuel? Who is he? Why does he matter?
Well, Absalom is the 3rd son of David. So there is Amnon and Chileab, who dies young, and he's the brother of Tamar. So you meet him in 2 Samuel, and it's during the time that you're also introduced to Tamar, you learn that Tamar's been raped by her half-brother Amnon. And then you find out, Absalom, he's about to avenge her and take her into his household, and he's in the line, right, of kings. But I think initially it's like you're reading it and you're going, oh, Absalom's righteous. He is this righteous guy. And the reality is he isn't. He is an absolute politician. He is opportunistic in his nature. And he reminds us a lot of Saul.
Right.
So he is beautiful externally, and internally he is void of character. And so the text actually says it in chapter 14. It says there was no blemish on him, which was in reference to his looks. But in the rest of that Hebrew phrase is actually used in the rest of the Old Testament in a lot of different places to describe holiness. So when you're looking at sacrifices or the priest, it would be in reference to no blemish on him. But here, the author uses it in reference to his appearance. And so effectively what they're saying is his having no blemish is only skin deep. So he is externally beautiful and internally void of character.
And that's a cue actually to us to remember back to 1 Samuel, where we had Saul was described explicitly in those terms, and then also the oldest son in David's family was described that way, and it was like, oh, well, he must be the king. So it's this whole idea that
Man looks at outward appearance.
Yeah,
but
man
God
looks at the outward appearance.
And one of the things that y'all are doing right now is one of the coolest things that you get to do in the historical books and a historical narrative in the Old Testament in particular is that you have these richly textured characters, right? And so, because somebody might be listening to this and be like, well, why does it matter that he's described this way? But as you just pointed out, the writer is so shrewd in that he's giving us these complicated characters because he is telling us a very complicated story. I think a lot of people don't feel permission to engage with the Bible as a story in that way.
Well, I think the bigger thing is just that by the time we get to Absalom's story, if you're reading it in the context of the whole book, you know to look for these patterns. At this point, the author is communicating things to us through repetition of themes and ideas. And so when he shows up on the scene, you're like, this feels like something else. And you're supposed to, because it's meant to build expectation and tension. And I think with Absalom in particular, as Taryn was pointing out, he's the 3rd son of the 4th wife, but the 2nd son, who would have been in line for the throne, is dead, which means that we can't trust Absalom's motives right out of the gate because his vendetta is against the son who is in line for the throne. And so the reading that gets put onto this, if you haven't followed the whole story, is David doesn't act when his daughter is raped, and so Absalom jumps in unless you're paying attention.
Right, and it is you would think on its face, which is like he's so the rest of you move into the conspiracy that he contrives, and it's you see he is so shrewd, but in reality it's like he's just making a political play.
He's manipulating a vulnerable situation.
Absolutely.
So what is this conspiracy? You just mentioned conspiracy. Like, what is the conspiracy that Absalom undertakes? Because what I'm hearing you say is that Absalom is a complicated character. Let me just try something. He's like Jude Law on the outside, but Voldemort on the inside.
So Gene Edwards wrote.
Wait, did Gene Edwards say that he's like at Jude Law?
Yeah, that's basically what he said.
Okay, because I'm about to say, go Gene.
Basically it. He wrote a book called The Tale of Three Kings, and the way he describes it is he's got the outward cloaking of the Spirit's presence without the inward filling of the Spirit's life.
Oh man,
and it was it.
That's definitely more righteous than the way that was said. That sounds more like Gene Edwards.
Yeah,
but also that. So
wait, say that again because I cut in with a joke.
Okay, he has the outward cloaking of the Spirit's power without the inward filling of the Spirit's presence and or the Spirit's life. But that's essentially what you see. And so his whole plot is to overthrow David. That's what he wants to do, and he conspires to do it. And I love this story so much because it is so intricate and it is so played out. I mean, you get, 13 years basically from the rape of Tamar until you actually see him actually enact his plan.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of, he's just patient. He's really patient
he's
and
so
plotting.
creepy. He just plots.
That's totally it. And
He's like an evil Fabio. He has like that. He really
That's
like.
what I was going for a minute ago. Dang
He
it.
really. I mean, because they go to great lengths, no pun intended, to talk about his great lengths, his hair,
yes.
and of course that's a key part of the story.
Right.
But
Evil Fabio.
yeah,
Yes.
So the problem with you, Jen, is that you're not just one step better than us all the time and how you say
Kyle.
it. You're 20 steps better. It's so
And
maddening.
she waits.
True.
She waits for the dumb to fall out of our mouths.
No,
and she kind of was like, "Oh, that's good. That's interesting."
Well, after we taught on this, this woman came up and showed me she had a GIF of Fabio riding on a horse with his hair flying behind him, and she's like, our group was texting this around this week, and so I was like,
I mean,
yeah,
that
we're
is
Watch
a
out for that
picture
tree.
of theology and community right there.
Watch your head.
Fabio
Careful.
gifs.
Fabio gifs. Okay, so we've got evil Fabio trying to overthrow his dad,
Right.
David.
So over a period of time, he managed to get back into the presence of David, so kind of back into Jerusalem. And during that time, you again kind of see him wait patiently. So it's another 4 years. And basically what he is doing is he's building a political base. And that is, he is getting people on his side. He is outwardly, posing as someone who has a lot of power. He's got all these chariots, and it's like he's got the presidential motorcade. Okay, just watching
Looks the
West
part.
Wing. So,
that was
we can talk about it
actually
later.
that was a big cue for us in the text. Is it talks about how he gets back into good graces with David, and verse 1 of chapter 15 says,
Right.
after this Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him, which was actually the fulfillment of what Samuel had ranted. When Samuel does his, what a king's going to do, he's going to take and he's going to take. And the very first thing that he says that he will take is he will take your sons to run before his chariots.
It's so good. Well, and a chariot, I mean, it's nonsensical during
Yeah.
this time, right? So first off, he's in Jerusalem, and so it's
doesn't
rocky and
need
hilly.
it.
He doesn't need it. And it's exactly what...
It matched his hair, though.
Yeah, that's true. And it probably looked really good when he was riding in it. And it's exactly what the kings of Israel were not to do, which was to gather chariots and horses. Their strength was to come from the Lord. So anyways, he's doing that and kind of building this base, and really people are coming alongside him. And then he basically crafts a plan of attack. So he creates a scheme against David, and he makes up a problem with David kind of handling these disputes among the tribes. He exploits the divisions of the people and gains their favor. And so during this time, you see in the text, David's power is weakening with the people, and Absalom is growing. Absalom's power is growing. And so that happens for about 4 years, and then the groundwork's laid, and he goes in for the kill, basically.
And I think whenever I'm reading this, I ask myself the question, listen, if God is God choosing Absalom? Like, is God...
Like, how is this part of God's sovereign plan?
Right, because didn't God choose David? And here's Absalom, the renegade rebel, political maneuverist, and he's overthrown. Why does God...
And it seems like it's working.
Right, because I thought...
It's going to work. It's
Right.
going to work seamlessly because he both is chosen. He is chosen by God to fulfill God's word in 2 Samuel 12, which was that the sword would never depart from David's house. And so we're going to see Absalom used as God's instrument of discipline in the life of David. But there's a clue to us in the text of what's going on, just in case the reader starts to lose track. And in verse 13 of chapter 15, it says, and a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. And what's essentially being said there is that Absalom is the man of the people's choosing, just as we saw with Saul.
Right.
And so then you begin to go, oh, he's supposed to make me think about Saul. And then all of these parallels between his story and Saul's story begin to emerge from the text. So yes, he is absolutely chosen by God as the one who will bring to pass God's word of judgment that was spoken against the house of David in 2 Samuel 12. And we're going to see him, I mean, man, he is a bad dude.
Yeah. So he does rout David. David flees from Jerusalem, and now he's kind of on the run. All right?
Again.
Yes.
Yeah, again, just like he was with Saul.
But it's more painful this time because now it's his own son.
And so while he's on the run, there's this incredible story in 2 Samuel 16, verses 5 through 14, and I just want to talk about it. JT, would you actually just read 2 Samuel 16, verses 5 through 14, and we're gonna hear about Shimei. Is that how I say his name?
You say it however you want, as long as you say it confidently. Am
His
I right?
name is Shimei.
Shimei.
Particularly
Thanks for getting that clear for me. Because I was going to stop and pause. Okay, so yes, this is 2 Samuel 16, verses 5 through 14. When King David came to Bahurim, there came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera, and he came and cursed continually. And he threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David, and all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. And Shimei said as he cursed, get out, you man of blood, you worthless man. The Lord has avenged on all of you the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned, and the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, your evil is on you, for you are a man of blood. Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and take off his head. But the king said, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? If he is cursing because the Lord has said to him, curse David, who then shall say, why have you done so? And David said to Abishai, and so to all his servants, behold, my son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjamite leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look on the wrong done to me, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing today. So David and his men went on the road, while Shimei went along the hillside opposite him and cursed as he went, and threw stones at him and flung dust. And the king and all the people who were with him arrived weary at the Jordan, and there he refreshed himself.
I love this story because when I read it, and maybe our internet age, I immediately think trolling.
Totally.
So like David,
That's the original internet
that's so
troll.
good.
David
That's
just
so
got
good.
dethroned, and now he's out there kind of licking his wounds, and people are adding him like, yo, you're terrible. You're the worst. This is what you deserve, right? Mm-hmm. So troll.
And that's exactly what came to mind as I didn't even have it in my notes when I was teaching it. And all of a sudden I'm up there like having this moment in front of a room full of women.
Those are the best.
Because it's exactly that. And even the way that David responds to him, I think is instructive for us because he's willing to say, this is part truth and part error. Yes. Like he is a man of blood. He is reaping what he has sown. It's not for the reasons that Shimei is saying, but he is able to acknowledge, he's able to take own what's his and let the rest go.
It is really interesting because you see David come under the chastisement of God in another way. So it's like he knows that's what's happening with Absalom, and you see him fleeing, yes, in passivity, but you see a more humble David. So if you compare this back to the way that he responded to Nabal back in 1 Samuel, which is like he's insulted a couple of times, and he's like, "Strap on your swords, men, we're going." You know, and it is it's a different David. Yeah. He's coming under the discipline of God while trusting God and trusting himself to the Lord. And it's good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was just reading yesterday, totally unrelated to this, Eugene Peterson in his book Leap Over a Wall, which is about the story of David. So it's not unrelated to this. I wasn't reading the book for this. He was talking about this passage in that book, and he was talking about how the wilderness in Scripture is often used either to like soften or harden, and that David is a man who's now been softened in the wilderness. He was softened with Saul, and now he's being softened with Absalom. And you're right. And he points to the Nabal situation where he's like, "This is what David had done here," and so that maybe that. It gestures that David is receiving in a way that he had not yet, the discipline of the Lord, and namely around the issue of hardening his heart to Absalom after the killing of Amnon, right? That David had hardened his heart towards Absalom and not allowed him back into his presence when it came to Amnon.
Well, here's the thing. I kind of think about that.
No, I want to hear.
That was, the thing that... in my mind, I'm looking at that and some of the commentaries that I'd read as well, it felt a little bit more like David continuing on in his passivity. So he brings Absalom back in without seeing his face for the first 2 years. So he doesn't even have a conversation with him. And then a couple years later, it's Absalom basically is like, I need a relationship with my dad. Joab, get me in there. He burns some fields and bullies his way into
Joab's stuff on fire.
Right.
And Joab's like, okay.
The further you get in the story, you're like, let's burn some more of Joab's stuff. But at this point, you're not really,
But anyways, he gets before his dad, and what you don't see in the text is any type of conversation. There's no reconciliation, and there's no justice from David.
That's right.
So Absalom, because he murdered Amnon, he deserved to die by the law. He deserved to die, and technically he should have. And what David doesn't do is he doesn't enact justice, and he doesn't enact reconciliation, and so he's being passive.
It's weird because he moves from being the David of the story of Abigail and Nabal, the quick to anger, to almost like paralyzed in his. He's actually very similar to Jacob at the end of Genesis after the rape, not surprisingly, after the rape of Jacob's daughter Dinah. It's a similar pattern to the story where he just shuts down because he sees his own guilt in what's happened. And but the pattern that we see with David toward his sons is overindulgence. Even in the way that Amnon treats Tamar, there is an entitlement that Amnon acts out of. And David does not. He doesn't just do nothing on the other side of the terrible incident. He had done nothing on the front side of that other than just say, what do you want?
What do you want to do?
And that's what we'll continue to see. I mean, when Absalom, spoiler alert, when Absalom dies, David is beside himself. Right. And there's more going on there than just the death of Absalom. Obviously, it's his guilt is all wrapped up in it.
And that mourning is unique on a couple of different levels because particularly when you see David mourning Absalom, it's private. And so before he had mourned publicly. So with the death of Saul and Jonathan, he's basically instructing the people on how to mourn. He's penning a poem. Like it is communal in a sense. Yeah. And there's no theology. There's no theology involved. So even as he mourns the death of the newborn, his newborn, you see him anoint himself and go into worship. And it's articulate. And here, there's just nothing articulated in it. And so it's really interesting. You just see a different David kind of stand up and leave, hop over the fence, and go away to mourn. And he's beside himself, cannot stop weeping and wailing. Yeah.
Well, why is David's family such a mess?
Because David is bad.
Yes. Yes and no.
So this is, So...
Was it because of David's sin? Like, is that why there's...
that's what chapter 12 is telling us. Yeah. Right. And so, and I think Taryn and I have talked about this a lot. One of the reasons that these stories get taught in such wonky ways when you just hear a one-off message around them is because they're not connected to the flow of the whole story. And the story of Absalom cannot be separated from the story. The story of Absalom and Amnon cannot be separated from the story of David and Bathsheba.
That's right.
Because what we see in his two sons is an amplification of what we saw in his own personal sin with Bathsheba and Uriah. Right.
And it is ultimately a fulfillment of the promise of God to raise up evil out of the house of David.
Yeah.
And so it is God being faithful to his word, as difficult as it is for us to receive that.
And that's the hard part of this portion of the text is that you are living in the tension between God's promise of blessing in chapter 7 and God's promise of cursing in chapter 12.
Well, and even too, I think the tension of God's sovereignty and man's own sin.
Yeah.
And the juxtaposition of this, you're holding them because this is a product of David's sin, but it is no less Absalom's sin or Amnon's sin, right? So they're accountable for those things, while this is what is also what God has promised.
Right. Yeah, and I want to pause on that for a second. And JT, I'd love for you to jump in. In 2 Samuel 17:14, It just says, and Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. For the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel so that the Lord might bring harm upon Absalom. So when somebody reads this, and I get these questions all the time when we're dealing with a passage that's like this, and then Taryn and Jen were just talking about this tension between, God actively intervening and moving things and the responsibility of man's sin. Does the Lord actively bring harm to people? Because when you read a verse like this, it's like, he did this so that the Lord might bring harm upon Absalom. That chafes against our sensibilities, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't like that verse at all.
Right. Yeah, I don't either. And if I'm honest, this is kind of a theological wrestle and struggle for me. And even as I've kind of certainly grown to know the Lord, also grown to hopefully know the scriptures better too, I think my answer's changed. I think early, perhaps in my days when I would just have emphasized the sovereignty of God, right, I would have just said, the Lord does what he pleases, full stop. Mm-hmm. Even sometimes attributing things that are genuinely wicked to God. And the Bible never does that. Right. The Bible says that God always acts justly and righteously and perfectly. He only does that which is good and beautiful and true. And so one of the things we need to think about when we're reading passages like this is when the Bible does ascribe these things to God, it's never doing so in a way that is wicked or evil, but is pure and perfect and just.
And it's not in a vacuum.
That's exactly right. It's happening in the context of human history. It's not God in himself. It's God interacting with sinful, fallen humanity.
Jen, who's one of the smartest people that you know?
JT English.
That's true. And where did JT go to seminary at?
Pretty sure it was Southern Seminary.
It was. And we have a lot of people that are a part of our staff that have either are in programs at Southern or have completed programs through Southern. And we have a ton of our members across a variety of life stages who are currently students at Southern Seminary because they make it so easy and so accessible. And if you're looking to pursue more theological education, whether an undergrad or a master's, or even just to get some classes to become a better Bible teacher, you can go to Southern Seminary's website, sbts.edu, and you can apply using the code KNOWINGFAITH and have your application fee waived. One of the questions that I always ask is like, is this the judgment of God?
Right.
Has this it's not like it says anybody's name here. It says Absalom's name because Absalom had done wickedly, right? And so I think that for some folks, there's kind of two temptations. You read this and you go, any harm that comes upon me is harm that the Lord has brought upon me. But in the context of this story right here, that's not, I think, what we're supposed to conclude. We're supposed to conclude Absalom has done wickedly, and the Lord is judging Absalom and David's house because of the wicked actions of Absalom, right?
And specifically because of their participation in the scheme of redemptive history.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's it.
That's what we have to keep coming back to. This is not, I don't read this story and go, so then how does this apply to my family? Because this is a very special family. And we have fought with this tension throughout this text. And really, anytime you're in the Old Testament narratives, the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yes. And one of my biggest beefs with the way that women in particular are taught the Bible is that they're asked to enter into these stories as though they're their stories. Yep. Now, there are ways in which we should do that. And especially Taryn and I have talked a lot about just how do we navigate these very difficult stories about the hurt that comes to women. But there has been this tendency to tell women that all of the infertility themes that run throughout there are speaking to our individual stories of infertility as women, instead of, no, these are actually about how God is doing a miraculous thing through the line that he has promised. Right. And so we end up actually causing women to check out of the story because they become so inwardly turned on their own hurt, which is legitimate hurt. And then we've robbed them of what the story, of the hope that the story does have to offer because we've told them that it's about something that is not its primary concern.
It's Bible reading 101.
Yeah.
It is to come to the text and understand this is primarily about God, the character of God. Right. And then secondarily, there are things that I can learn in context. Right. And so I'm reading everything in context of what the story is saying and in the entire canon of Scripture, right? And then to be able to draw out.
And it's not that there aren't things to learn, but that the primary thrust here is descriptive.
That's right.
Yes.
So it's right. There might be something to learn from these stories principally, or like, wow, that's maybe tells me something broadly about who God is or how he's working in the world or how he works in the world. But we got to be very careful, particularly in this genre of historical narrative,
Sure. Yes,
to tie
that's
a
it.
1-to-1. The Lord brought harm to Absalom, so anything bad that happens to me is the Lord bringing harm to me.
Would not be a good way to read that.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And another thing, I think I loved what JT said. I think that's what we need to keep telling people as we're navigating these
Way to
hard
go,
passages.
JT. That's
Good
your
job,
win.
JT.
That's your win for the show.
Yeah. And I think the other piece of it is if we're paying attention to how the story is being given to us, from a literary standpoint, both with this story and with the story of Jacob that we referenced earlier, when we see the consequences of whatever that crisis moment was, the voice of God and references to God tend to drop out of the text. And that's always something that if you're learning to read Old Testament narrative, you should be paying attention to. But it's telling us something about when God is fulfilling a judgment, how he is doing it, because more often than not, the way we picture him turning Absalom into a little puppet, like almost possessing his body and making him do every single thing that he wants him to do. But in reality, what he does here is what he does when Pharaoh's heart is hardened. It's that he just steps back and lets Absalom be Absalom.
Gosh, how terrifying.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. That theologians call it the passive wrath of God.
Yes.
Right? The withdrawal of divine protection and direction. Yeah, that is terrifying. Lauren and I were reading through Exodus right now in our Bible reading, and it comes across with Potiphar. Not Potiphar, excuse me, Pharaoh.
Pharaoh, yeah.
Which is just scary.
Yeah.
So why, like if I want drama, give me a good Amish romance book. You know what I'm saying?
Gross, Kyle.
No, I'm just saying that's what sells, right? So like,
Did you say Amish?
yeah, you know
that's
Amish
the whole
romance.
thing.
Do you know this?
No, I've
it's a
no
giant
idea
genre.
what you are talking about.
Oh my gosh, Jen, back me up here. It's a big
I
deal.
don't read them. I
No.
just know it's out there.
Jen and I are constantly loaning copies.
Like
No.
back and forth.
No, okay, but seriously,
With
like,
Amish Fabio on the cover.
exactly. That's what it made me think of it. But
Women of the wheat fields.
I think about Great. How many of these can we come up with right now?
No, please.
I think about TNT's motto, we know drama. So, right, if I want drama, why not turn into TNT? Like, why care about the family of this ancient king? I'm a Christian, and I can watch Burn Notice on TNT. That's a show that I know exists. Or I can read the story of David and his messed up family. Why take time to invest in learning this story?
Well, a couple of reasons. It's the word of God. Primarily.
Think of a few.
Yeah, but really,
Well, Samuel is a book of the history of the nation of Israel. It is a history book. It is a history lesson, right, for God's people. And in turn, yes, it is a history lesson for us who are a part of the family of God. And so it is important. And there are so many, it is a direct reflection of us. We can see ourselves in those things. We are not the primary focus of those things. I think the more that I've been in this text and teaching this text particularly, these characters, this story creates a sense of longing in our hearts. We are meant. We're meant to be. It's like purpose to be puzzled almost. It is. I'm wrestling with the text. Why are these characters this way? Why is this happening in this way? And ultimately, I'm like, I was so frustrated with David. Can I just say this? I was so frustrated. That's kind of where I was at the end of my last teaching was, why are you this way? Why?
Also, how are we going to land the plane?
Yes.
I don't know how we're going to land the plane on this study.
Totally.
There's not a lot of plot resolution.
Yes, but his family, all of the people around David, you see it right in this and throughout this text. It's betrayers and rivalers and slanderers and abusers of power and position. People are just wrought with sin. And David's passive in his ruling. And ultimately that is us, And so Peter Williams, he's a biblical scholar.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that he says is, I don't know of any national literature that says as much negative about the people it comes from as the Old Testament. And I thought, you know what, that's it though, because God in his kindness affords us the full truth of the human condition and in the same place offers us the cure. And that is what this book draws out, that there's a longing placed in our heart, not for this imperfect king and his line of sons to follow, but ultimately a perfect king that we're promised from him. that there would be this, over and over again, these characters kind of point us to the longing in our hearts placed for Christ, or longing placed in our hearts for Christ.
This story of Absalom ends with Absalom being hung on a tree.
Mm-hmm.
He's hung on a tree by his beautiful hair, and then he is stabbed with spears in his side, and then he is cast into a pit and covered with stones. And so we see the literal son of David suffer a death that he deserved. And then it makes us long for the son of David who will come, who is going to suffer that death on our behalf. Mm-hmm. But this is a book that breaks your heart. Yes. It's not a book that gives you a happy ending. And I think that's one of the things that we can miss, is that we want the Bible to tell us what we want to hear. And it will. But it will do so by making us pass through every stage of grief that we need to get us there.
That's both of those were really good. I got like chills when both of you were talking. I've never made the connection between Absalom.
I had neither. That's beautiful.
Dying that way and the coming son.
Well, and the interesting thing too in that text is that it references a monument that he had created for himself, juxtaposed next to his true monument, which was these stones that had been thrown over his burial ground. And so a monument erected basically to a false monument to kind of puff himself up, when in reality it's like, you died the death of a cursed man because you are cursed.
Yeah. Man, that's good.
That's beautiful.
Wow. I don't know what to say. I kind of feel like we probably should just like play the music out right there.
It's like that little spunky music we have at the end.
Taryn, do you have a nickname? Can we call you in the Knowing Faith room Taryn Mic Drop Mays?
Yeah, you know what? I would love that.
She's called that everywhere, so it would be appropriate to call her that.
My husband calls me that all the time. He's always just walking around.
Does he really?
Yeah.
Oh, for real? That's pretty awesome.
Always one-liners at home. It's great.
Yeah, it's a great nickname. Taryn, we're so glad that you came on. Thank you.
It was awesome.
Thank you for the good work you're doing teaching Bible here in the life of the church. So grateful for you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun.
If there's anything that you heard us talk about on the show that you'd like to know more about, you should reach out to Taryn or Jen.
I had one good line, I think.
Yeah, you did. If you want to talk about what JT talked, the one breath that JT got in, or if you just want to talk about Amish romance, JT's got some great titles.
Kyle's your man.
No. I'm not letting you pin this on me.
No, you have the best title.
I did have a title.
You threw out a title like you've been working on a book. You ventured it out there like, haha, isn't that funny, guys? Like to see if we took it seriously or not.
Just play.
I'm gonna go search your computer and be like, women of fields. Okay.
If anybody ends up using this as a title for a book I'm writing, just let me know.
No, we're published right now. Yeah. Listen, you might be able to find stuff on the website tvcresources.net. On our next episode, we're going to be talking about the ascension of Jesus. See you next time. Grace and peace.